When did you realize your teacher was going to get you killed? I was 23 minutes into the state standardized test when I smelled peanut butter. My throat started closing immediately. Mrs. Van Horn was walking between rows with her clipboard, marking who was still working and who'd moved to the essay section. I raised my hand slowly, trying not to panic, but my fingers were already tingling, the familiar warmth spreading across my chest that meant I had maybe 5 minutes before my airway would completely shut. She walked past me twice before finally stopping at my desk. Her eyes were cold behind those wire-rimmed glasses she always wore. "What is it, Liam?" My voice came out raspy. "Someone's eating peanut butter. I need my EpiPen. It's in the nurse's office. I have to go now." Mrs. Van Horn looked at me like I'd just asked to burn down the school. Testing protocol clearly states no interruptions for any reason. You signed the agreement. Your parents signed the agreement. Everyone in this room understands that state testing takes priority over personal issues. This isn't a personal issue. My throat was getting tighter. I could feel my tongue swelling. I have a severe peanut allergy. It's documented. I'm going into anaphylaxis right now. She leaned down close enough that I could smell her coffee breath. I've been teaching for 18 years. I've seen every trick students use to cheat or get out of hard work. Fake stomach aches, pretend panic attacks, suddenly remembered family emergencies. I'm not falling for it. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but she snatched it from my hand before I could unlock it. Phones are prohibited during testing. That's automatic test invalidation. I tried to stand, but she put her hand on my shoulder and pushed me back into the seat. "You will remain in your chair until the testing period concludes. In 3 hours and 14 minutes, you can visit the nurse all you want." My lips were starting to feel numb. The room was getting darker around the edges. Jordan Kemp sat 2 rows over. He'd been in my classes since elementary school. He knew about my allergy because he'd seen me nearly die in the cafeteria in 6th grade when someone put peanut sauce on my pasta as a prank. Jordan stood up fast enough to knock his chair over. "Mrs. Van Horn, he's not faking. I've seen him have reactions before. His face is already swelling." She turned on Jordan with fury I'd never seen from a teacher before. "Sit down immediately or you're both disqualified." Jordan hesitated, looking between me and her. I wanted to tell him it was okay to sit down, that he shouldn't risk his test score for me, but I couldn't speak anymore. My tongue had swollen too much. Mrs. Van Horn walked to the front of the room and pressed the call button for the main office. "Yes, I need security in room 318. I have 2 students disrupting state testing and refusing to comply with protocol. Send someone immediately." Her voice was calm, professional, like she was reporting a spilled drink instead of a medical emergency. Jordan tried again. "Look at his face. Look at his lips. They're turning blue. Call 911 right now. You have 3 seconds to sit down or I'm calling your parents and the superintendent." Jordan's father coached the basketball team. His mom was president of the PTA. They'd drilled into him since kindergarten that teachers were authority figures who must be obeyed without question. He sat down, but he pulled out his phone under his desk. Mrs. Van Horn saw the movement immediately. She marched over and grabbed his phone too. "Now you've both invalidated your tests. Congratulations. You'll be retaking this in summer school." She dropped both phones into her desk drawer and locked it. I tried to get air, but it felt like breathing through a straw that was getting narrower every second. My vision was tunneling. The test booklet in front of me blurred into meaningless shapes. Ashley Reeves raised her hand from the back corner. "Mrs. Van Horn, I think he's actually dying. Everyone needs to focus on their own work. This is exactly the kind of drama that students create to disrupt testing. It won't work. Not in my classroom." My head felt heavy. I tried to hold it up, but my neck muscles weren't working right. I slumped forward onto my desk. The plastic was cool against my cheek. Somewhere far away, I heard someone screaming, but the sound was muffled, like I was underwater. Mrs. Van Horn's voice cut through sharp and clear. "If you cannot maintain appropriate testing behavior, you will all be removed and your scores invalidated. Is that what you want? 3 years of high school preparation wasted because one student wants attention?" The door burst open. Mr. Garrison, the security officer, walked in with his radio crackling. He looked at me, collapsed on my desk with my lips blue and my face swelling. He ran over immediately. "What's going on here?" Mrs. Van Horn stepped between him and me. "We're conducting state testing. This student is disrupting the process by faking a medical emergency to avoid completing his exam." Mr. Garrison pushed past her and grabbed my wrist to check my pulse. His hand was warm. Too warm. Everything felt cold except where he touched me. "Call 911 right now. He's going into shock. This is not a drill. We need paramedics immediately." Mrs. Van Horn's voice got higher. "If you interrupt this test, the entire class will have to retake it. That's district policy." He keyed his radio. "All units, medical emergency in room 318. Student in anaphylactic shock. Get the nurse and call 911 now." Mrs. Van Horn tried to grab the radio from him. "You don't have authority to make that call. I'm the supervising teacher and I'm telling you this student is faking." Mr. Garrison looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "Lady, his pulse is 140 and thready. His airway is closing. If we don't get him an EpiPen in the next 60 seconds, he's going to die on your classroom floor. And when that happens, you're going to prison." Her face went white. She took a step back. The nurse, Ms. DeLuca, ran in carrying the red emergency bag. She took one look at me and ripped open the EpiPen case. "Somebody tell me what allergen." "Peanuts," Jordan said. Someone was eating peanut butter. I smelled it about 20 minutes ago. Ms. DeLuca jammed the EpiPen into my thigh through my jeans. The pain was sharp and immediate, but breathing didn't get easier. She pulled out a second one. This is bad. His throat's almost completely closed. She administered the second dose. Paramedics arrived 3 minutes later with a stretcher and equipment that looked too complicated for a school hallway. They put an oxygen mask over my face and started an IV in my arm. One of them was talking to Ms. DeLuca about timing and dosage. The other was cutting through my shirt to attach heart monitor leads. Mrs. Van Horn stood by her desk, watching everything like it was happening on TV. Mr. Garrison was on his phone speaking quietly but urgently. I caught fragments. Negligence. Refusal to provide medical care. Yes, student is being transported now. The paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher. The ceiling tiles blurred past as they wheeled me into the hallway. Students' faces appeared in doorways as we passed. Teachers stood with their mouths open. The fluorescent lights were too bright. In the ambulance, the female paramedic kept talking to me, even though I couldn't respond. Stay with us, Liam. You're doing great. We're almost to the hospital. Your mom's meeting us there. Just keep breathing. She adjusted something on the IV bag. The male paramedic was driving fast enough that the siren's wail seemed continuous. How long since first exposure? He called back. Approximately 25 minutes based on witness statements. That's a long time. Too long. They could have lost him. At the hospital, everything moved in fast motion. Bright lights. People in scrubs shouting medical terms I didn't understand. A doctor with kind eyes leaning over me saying I was safe now. Then my mom's face appeared above me. Her mascara was running and she was gripping my hand so hard it hurt. But I was glad it hurt because it meant I was still alive to feel it. When I woke up later in a hospital bed with an IV in each arm and monitors beeping around me, my mom was sitting in a chair beside me holding a crumpled tissue. My dad stood by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the low, angry voice he usually reserved for contractors who messed up his construction projects. A lawyer, yes? Today. I don't care what it costs. He looked at me, and his expression softened slightly. He's awake. I'll call you back. My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass, but I could breathe. That was better than half an hour ago when I couldn't. Mom started crying harder when I opened my eyes fully. They said you were minutes away from cardiac arrest. Minutes. Because that teacher wouldn't let you leave. I tried to say something, but she pressed her fingers gently against my lips. Don't talk yet. The doctor said your throat is going to hurt for a few days. A woman in a police uniform came in carrying a tablet. I'm Detective Rachel Moss. I need to ask you some questions about what happened today. Is that okay? I nodded. My dad moved closer to the bed. His jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. She pulled up a chair. Can you tell me what happened from the beginning? Everything you remember. I wrote on the notepad the nurse had left on my bedside table. Smelled peanut butter during test. Told teacher I needed EpiPen. She said no. Said I was faking. Detective Moss wrote everything down. Did she make any statements about why she refused to let you get medical help? I wrote more. Said testing protocol more important than personal issues. Took my phone when I tried to call 911. Threatened other students who tried to help. The detective's expression darkened as she read. Did any other students witness this? My mom answered. The entire class of 32 students witnessed it, plus the security officer who responded. Detective Moss stood up. I'll need to interview all of them. This is a serious case. Denying emergency medical care to a minor. Reckless endangerment. Possibly attempted manslaughter, depending on intent. Mrs. Van Horn is currently at the district office giving her statement. She's claiming you were disrupting the test and she had reason to believe you were faking your symptoms. My dad's fist hit the wall hard enough to dent the drywall. She watched him turn blue and did nothing. She threatened the kids who tried to help. She locked their phones in her desk so they couldn't call for help. If that security guard hadn't come in when he did, our son would be dead, and she would have let it happen to protect some fucking test scores. A nurse poked her head in at the noise. Everything okay in here? Detective Moss nodded. We're fine. Just emotional. Understandable given the circumstances. She turned back to me. Liam, I know this is hard, but I need you to write down everything you remember, Mrs. Van Horn said. Her exact words, if possible. I filled 3 pages of the notepad with every detail I could remember. How she'd called it a trick to get out of hard work. How she'd said personal issues didn't matter. How she'd threatened to invalidate everyone's tests if they helped me. How she'd told security I was faking even as I collapsed. Detective Moss photographed each page with her phone. This is going to be very helpful. Your classmates are giving similar accounts. We have the security camera footage from the hallway showing the timeline of events. And the paramedics documented that you were in critical condition when they arrived. The evidence is overwhelming. My mom wiped her eyes. What happens now? The detective put her tablet away. The district is conducting their own investigation, but this has moved beyond school discipline. The state's attorney will review the case for criminal charges. Given the severity and the number of witnesses, I expect Mrs. Van Horn will be arrested within 48 hours. 2 days later, I was home on the couch, still recovering when the news broke. My phone exploded with messages from classmates. Jordan called instead of texting. Dude, turn on channel 8. Mrs. Van Horn's getting arrested. I grabbed the remote. The screen showed Mrs. Van Horn in handcuffs being led out of her house, by Detective Moss and another officer. A reporter stood on the lawn narrating. Elizabeth Van Horn, a veteran teacher at Brookfield High School, was arrested this morning on charges of child endangerment and reckless conduct. The charges stem from an incident during state testing where Van Horn allegedly refused to allow a student with a life-threatening allergy to seek medical treatment. The student, whose name is being withheld due to age, nearly died before security intervened. The camera cut to the district superintendent, Dr. Raymond Fletcher, standing at a podium, looking uncomfortable. We take these allegations extremely seriously. Mrs. Van Horn has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. We are reviewing all protocols related to emergency situations during testing periods. My dad snorted from his chair. Reviewing protocols? They're covering their asses. He'd been on the phone with lawyers for 2 days straight. 3 different firms wanted to take our case. He'd chosen the one with the most experience in educational malpractice and civil rights violations. Mom brought me soup I didn't really want, but ate anyway because she needed something to do with her hands. The doorbell rang that afternoon. Mom answered it and came back looking grim. A reporter, wanting a statement. Dad's already called them. I'm calling the lawyer. No more reporters. No statements. This goes through proper channels. But the story was already everywhere. Local news, state news, social media. Someone had leaked the security footage of Mrs. Van Horn confiscating Jordan's phone while I collapsed in the background. The video went viral within hours. Comments poured in from thousands of people. Teachers defending testing protocols, parents outraged at Mrs. Van Horn's actions, students sharing their own stories of teachers who'd refused medical care. The discourse was overwhelming. The school board called an emergency meeting. My parents went without me since I was still recovering. They came home 3 hours later looking exhausted. Mom dropped her purse on the counter. They suspended Mrs. Van Horn without pay pending trial. But half the board defended her, said she was following protocol as she understood it, said we were trying to destroy a dedicated teacher's career over a misunderstanding. Dad poured himself a drink. The other half wanted her teaching license permanently revoked. It got heated, parents screaming at each other, teachers from the union saying this sets a dangerous precedent. It was a circus. Jordan's mom called later that night. I answered because my parents were both too tired to deal with more drama. Mrs. Kemp's voice was tight with anger. Jordan's failing. The district invalidated his test because he stood up during the incident. They're saying he disrupted testing protocol, and now he has to retake it over summer. But if he retakes it, the best score he can get is passing. It won't qualify him for honors placement next year. I felt sick. Jordan had tried to save my life, and now he was being punished for it. That's not fair. He was trying to help me. Mrs. Kemp's laugh was bitter. Fair doesn't enter into it. The district is in damage control mode. They're invalidating every test from that room to cover their liability. All 32 students. 3 years of preparation wasted because the district hired a teacher who nearly killed a student and then tried to cover it up. I told my parents after hanging up. My dad was already typing on his laptop, adding it to the lawsuit. The district's going to pay for every single student affected. This isn't just about you anymore, it's systemic failure at every level. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mrs. Van Horn's face when Mr. Garrison told her I was dying. She hadn't looked scared or sorry. She'd looked annoyed, like I was inconveniencing her by having a medical emergency during her precious test. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later. I had to testify. The courtroom was smaller than I expected from TV shows. Mrs. Van Horn sat at the defense table in a gray suit looking nothing like the teacher who'd worn the same floral dress every testing day for 3 years. Her lawyer was a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Dunmore, who'd made her reputation defending educators against misconduct charges. The prosecutor was Assistant State's Attorney Michael Reeves, young enough to still have energy for outrage. He called me to the stand first. After I was sworn in, he asked me to describe what happened on the day of the test. I went through it all again. The smell of peanut butter, the immediate allergic reaction, Mrs. Van Horn's refusal to let me leave, her confiscation of phones, her insistence that I was faking, every detail I could remember. When I finished, Attorney Dunmore stood for cross-examination. She smiled at me like we were old friends. Liam, you've had this peanut allergy your whole life, correct? Yes. And you're aware it's your responsibility to avoid exposure to allergens? Yes. Have you ever used your allergy to get out of uncomfortable situations before? I frowned. No, never. But you did want to get out of that test, didn't you? It was a difficult exam. No. I'd studied for months. I wanted to take it. She pulled out a paper. According to your school records, you've visited the nurse 47 times this school year. That seems excessive for someone claiming they never seek special treatment. I felt my face get hot. I have chronic migraines too, and asthma. It's all documented in my medical records. But convenient timing, isn't it? Right during the hardest test of the year. Objection. The judge, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at Attorney Dunmore. Sustained. Counsel, the medical evidence is clear. Redirect your line of questioning. She nodded. Liam, when you smelled peanut butter, did you immediately tell Mrs. Van Horn? I raised my hand. She ignored me for several minutes. So, you waited. You didn't treat it as the emergency you claim it was. I was trying to follow classroom protocol. Raising your hand and waiting to be called on. Exactly. Following protocol. Just like Mrs. Van Horn was following testing protocol. Prosecutor Reeves objected again. Judge Williams sustained it again. Mrs. Van Horn's lawyer was trying to make me look like I'd caused my own near-death experience by being polite. After I stepped down, Jordan testified. He described seeing my face swell and my lips turn blue. He described Mrs. Van Horn threatening him when he tried to help. He described her confiscating his phone and calling security on students instead of calling for medical help. Attorney Dunmore tried the same tactics with him, suggesting he was trying to cheat, implying he'd coordinated with me to disrupt the test. Jordan held firm. I watched my best friend nearly die while our teacher did nothing. That's what happened. No amount of legal games changes that fact. Mr. Garrison testified next. He described responding to a call about disruptive students and finding me in medical crisis. He described Mrs. Van Horn's resistance to calling 911. His testimony was clinical and damning. The paramedics testified about my condition when they arrived. Critical. Minutes from respiratory failure. Brain damage likely if treatment had been delayed any longer. The defense called Mrs. Van Horn to the stand. She'd been coached well. Her voice was steady and confident. I've been teaching for 18 years without incident. I've proctored state testing dozens of times. The protocols are very clear. No interruptions for any reason. Students sign agreements acknowledging this. Parents sign agreements. The integrity of the test depends on strict adherence to these rules. Prosecutor Reeves stood for cross-examination. His voice was cold. Mrs. Van Horn, did you receive training on medical emergencies in the classroom? Yes. Annual training. And what does that training say about student health emergencies? That we call the nurse immediately? Did you call the nurse when Liam reported an allergic reaction? She hesitated. I believed he was exaggerating to avoid the test. Based on what medical expertise? I'm not a doctor. Exactly. You're not a doctor. Yet you made a medical diagnosis that overruled the student's own assessment of his condition. Objection? Argumentative. Sustained. Reeves continued. Mrs. Van Horn, when Jordan Kemp stood up and confirmed that Liam was having a genuine medical emergency, what did you do? She shifted in her seat. I told him to sit down. He was disrupting testing protocol. When multiple students expressed concern for Liam's condition, what did you do? I maintained order in my classroom. When Mr. Garrison, a trained security officer, told you Liam was in shock and needed immediate medical attention, what did you say? She looked at her lawyer. I expressed concern about invalidating the tests. You expressed concern about tests while a 16-year-old boy was dying. Mrs. Van Horn's composure cracked. I didn't know he was really dying. I thought he was faking, even when his lips turned blue, even when he collapsed on his desk. Even when another student who'd witnessed his previous reactions told you it was real, I made a judgment call that nearly killed him. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Mr. Reeves, move on. The prosecutor showed her a photo on a tablet. This is Liam in the ambulance. His face, swollen. Airway nearly closed. Heart rate critical. The paramedics' notes say he was minutes from death. Do you still believe he was faking? Mrs. Van Horn looked at the photo and something in her face changed. I was following protocol. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, my mom hugged me tight. You did great in there. That lawyer tried to twist everything, but you held your ground. Dad was on his phone again with our civil attorney. The criminal case would determine Mrs. Van Horn's fate. The civil case would determine how much the school district paid for their systemic failures. After recess, the judge delivered his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I'm binding Mrs. Elizabeth Van Horn over for trial on charges of child endangerment and reckless conduct. Bail is set at $50,000. Trial date to be set within 90 days. Mrs. Van Horn's face went gray. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. The judge wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm recommending to the State Board of Education that Mrs. Van Horn's teaching license be suspended pending resolution of this case. The safety of students must be the paramount concern. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed us. My dad put his arm around my shoulders, and we pushed through without comment. Our lawyer had been clear. No statements until after trial. School became weird after that. Some teachers looked at me with pity. Others with suspicion like I'd betrayed the profession by reporting what happened. Students split into camps. Those who thought Mrs. Van Horn was a monster who deserved prison. Those who thought I'd ruined a good teacher's life over an accident. I tried to avoid both groups. Jordan got harassed constantly. In the hallway, in the cafeteria, online, people calling him a snitch, saying he should have minded his business. His parents pulled him out and enrolled him in private school after someone spray-painted traitor on his locker. I visited him at his new school one afternoon. The campus was smaller but nicer. He seemed okay but different, quieter. We sat in the library and didn't talk about Mrs. Van Horn or the trial or any of it. Just talked about normal stuff. Video games, movies, his new basketball team. But the elephant was there between us. We'd both been changed by what happened and we couldn't go back. The civil lawsuit against the district moved forward while we waited for the criminal trial. Depositions, document requests, expert witnesses hired to testify about district policies and training failures. Our lawyer, Martin Cross, was relentless. He found 17 other incidents over 5 years where teachers had refused to allow students medical care during testing periods. None as severe as mine, but the pattern was clear. The district prioritized test scores over student safety. In one case, a diabetic student had been denied permission to check blood sugar and passed out. In another, a student with a broken arm had been forced to finish before going to the nurse. The district had settled these cases quietly with NDAs, but our case was too public to settle quietly. The media coverage was constant. Dr. Fletcher, the superintendent, resigned under pressure. The school board split into factions fighting over reforms. Parents demanded changes. Teachers' unions demanded protection for educators following protocol. It became a political battlefield with my near-death experience as the weapon everyone wielded. The criminal trial started on a cold morning in January, 7 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed. My parents, Jordan's family, students from my class, reporters, advocates from allergy awareness organizations who'd made my case their cause. Mrs. Van Horn sat at the defense table looking smaller somehow, like the weight of it all had compressed her. The prosecution's case was methodical. They called every witness, every student who'd seen what happened, the nurse who'd administered the EpiPens, the paramedics who'd saved my life, the doctors who'd treated me, each one building the picture of a teacher who'd chosen policy over humanity and nearly killed a child as a result. They showed the security footage from the hallway. Grainy, but clear enough. You could see Mr. Garrison running toward my classroom, see him key his radio frantically, see Mrs. Van Horn in the doorway arguing with him, while behind her my head was visible, slumped on the desk. The jury watched in silence. One woman in the front row had tears on her face. The defense strategy was clear. Paint Mrs. Van Horn as a dedicated teacher, caught in an impossible situation. Attack the district's protocols. Suggest that any reasonable person would have doubted a student's claims during high-stakes testing. Attorney Dunmore called education experts who testified about the pressure teachers faced during testing periods, the consequences for irregularities, the students who did fake emergencies to avoid exams. She called Mrs. Van Horn's former students who said she was strict but fair, who said she'd helped them succeed, who painted her as a caring educator who'd made one tragic mistake. Mrs. Van Horn testified again, this time with more emotion. I think about that day constantly. If I could go back and make different choices, I would. But in the moment, with 32 students taking the most important test of their lives, I made the decision I thought was right. I was wrong. I know that now, but I didn't intend to harm Liam. I thought I was maintaining order and protecting the integrity of the test for all students. Prosecutor Reeves was less gentle this time. Mrs. Van Horn, you testified you made a judgment call. Yes, based on your 18 years of experience. Yes. In those 18 years, how many students have you seen die from allergic reactions? None. How many students have you seen in anaphylactic shock? None. So you had no experience with this particular medical emergency? No. Yet you overruled the student's assessment of his own condition, a student who'd lived with this allergy his entire life, who knew exactly what was happening to his body. You decided you knew better. I thought he was faking. Why? Because students fake medical emergencies sometimes. How many students have you personally caught faking allergic reactions? She hesitated. None. How many students in your 18 years have faked anaphylaxis? I don't know. So you had no experience with students faking this particular condition, but you had seen how serious it could be during mandatory safety training, correct? Yes. And you chose to ignore that training. I was following testing protocol, a protocol that nowhere states you should let students die. Objection? Sustained. The prosecutor showed the photo again. Liam in the ambulance. Blue lips, swollen face. This is what following protocol looks like, Mrs. Van Horn. A 16-year-old boy minutes from death. When you saw this happening in real time, when students begged you to help, when a security officer told you it was a medical emergency, you still chose protocol over life. Do you understand what that means? She was crying now. I made a mistake. A mistake implies an accident. This was a choice. Multiple choices. Over 25 minutes, each time choosing to let him suffer rather than admit you might be wrong. No response. Mrs. Van Horn, do you believe you should be allowed to return to teaching? Her lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. The witness had been questioned about her fitness as an educator. She had to answer. Mrs. Van Horn wiped her eyes. I don't know. That's the first honest thing you've said today. Closing arguments took most of a day. Attorney Dunmore argued passion and humanity. A good teacher caught in a broken system, overworked, underpaid, drowning in regulations and protocols that contradicted each other. She'd made a mistake, but mistakes weren't crimes. The real villain was a district that put policy over people and left teachers to navigate impossible situations without support. Prosecutor Reeves argued facts and consequences. Mrs. Van Horn had received training on medical emergencies. She'd been told multiple times by multiple people that this was a real crisis. She'd actively prevented students from seeking help, taken their phones, threatened them, called security on them instead of calling for medical assistance. This wasn't a mistake in judgment. This was criminal negligence, and if not for the intervention of a security guard who'd ignored her orders, Liam would be dead. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman was a middle-aged black woman who looked tired. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of reckless conduct, we find the defendant guilty. Mrs. Van Horn collapsed into her chair. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. My mom squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. The judge set sentencing for 4 weeks later. Mrs. Van Horn was released on bail pending sentencing, but her teaching license was immediately suspended by the state board. She'd never teach again. Sentencing day was quieter. Fewer reporters. Fewer spectators. Just the essential people. The judge had read all the victim impact statements submitted by students and parents. He'd reviewed Mrs. Van Horn's employment record, her lack of prior criminal history, the letters of support from colleagues and former students. He looked at her when he spoke. Mrs. Van Horn, you were entrusted with the safety of children. That's the most sacred responsibility a teacher has. You violated that trust in the worst possible way. Your actions were not a momentary lapse. They were sustained negligence over an extended period during which you had multiple opportunities to choose differently. You didn't. He sentenced her to 3 years in prison. She'd be eligible for parole after 18 months. Additionally, permanent revocation of her teaching license and prohibition from working with children in any capacity. She was led away in handcuffs, her family sobbing in the gallery. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected, just emptiness. The civil case settled 2 months later. The district agreed to pay $3.8 million. Money for my medical expenses, for Jordan's lost academic opportunities, for the other 30 students whose tests had been invalidated, for reforms and training programs, for an independent monitor to oversee testing protocols. Martin Cross told us it was one of the largest settlements in state history for educational malpractice. The money didn't change much. I still woke up sometimes gasping for air, still checked 3 times that I had my EpiPen before leaving the house, still felt my throat tighten when I smelled peanut butter, even though logically I knew I was safe. Trauma doesn't care about money or justice. It lives in your body regardless. Jordan and I stayed friends but different, quieter. We'd been through something that marked us, made us older than 18. I graduated high school a year later, gave a speech at graduation about advocacy and speaking up when something's wrong, about how blind obedience to authority can be deadly. Some teachers clapped enthusiastically. Others sat with their arms crossed. The district had reformed testing protocols, multiple emergency procedures, training sessions, new policies about student health, taking precedence over testing integrity. But policies only work if people follow them, and people are fallible. I went to college across the country, needed distance from everything that had happened, studied pre-law because what I'd been through taught me that systems needed people willing to fight them, needed advocates who understood that rules were meant to protect people, not harm them. 5 years later, I was in law school when I got an email from Attorney Reeves. Mrs. Van Horn had been released on parole after serving 2 years. She was working in a warehouse now, living quietly, attending mandated therapy, trying to rebuild a life. He thought I'd want to know. I didn't feel anger anymore, just sadness for everyone involved, for the teacher who'd valued protocol over humanity and lost everything, for the students traumatized by her choices, for the district that had created a culture where teachers felt pressured to prioritize testing over safety, for Jordan who'd tried to do the right thing and been punished for it, for the system that had failed at every level until someone almost died. I wrote my law school admissions essay about that day, about learning that justice is complicated, that preventing harm matters more than punishing it after the fact, that systemic change requires more than prosecuting individuals. It requires examining the structures that enable harmful behavior, incentivize it, protect it. Several schools accepted me. I chose the one with the best health law program. Now I work on cases involving medical rights and institutional negligence. I represent students whose schools have failed them, parents fighting for their kids' safety, anyone caught between bureaucracy and humanity. Each case brings me back to that testing room, to Mrs. Van Horn's cold eyes, to the smell of peanut butter and the feeling of my throat closing, to Jordan standing up when everyone else stayed silent, to Mr. Garrison bursting through that door. Those moments shaped everything that came after. The reforms that followed my case have saved lives. Districts across the state revised their emergency protocols. Training improved. Teachers learned to prioritize student safety over testing integrity. But change is slow and uneven. I still hear stories of students denied medical care. Still see policies that value compliance over compassion. The work continues because the problems that nearly killed me didn't start with Mrs. Van Horn and didn't end with her conviction. They're embedded in systems that measure success by test scores instead of human welfare, that train teachers to see students as data points instead of people, that create environments where admitting uncertainty or making exceptions feels more dangerous than letting someone suffer. I think about Mrs. Van Horn sometimes, wonder if she thinks about me, if she understands that her choices that day changed both our lives forever, if she's found peace with what she did. I've forgiven her not because she deserves it, but because carrying anger was poisoning me. Forgiveness isn't for the person who harmed you, it's for yourself. Today, I'm 23, halfway through law school, in a relationship with someone who understands trauma and patience. I still carry an EpiPen everywhere, still check ingredient labels obsessively, still feel my heart race when I smell peanuts, but I'm alive, thriving, using what happened to make sure it happens to fewer people. That's the best justice I can create. Not revenge, but prevention. Not punishment, but change. Jordan's doing well, too, teaching history at his old private school. We text monthly, see each other during holidays. Never talk about that day, but both know it's there. The shared experience that bonded us and broke something in us simultaneously. We survived. That counts for something. Maybe everything.